I was 12 when I first stepped into the keeper's house on the ragged outcrop of Gull Rock Point, and I still carry the echo of the tide's low murmur as if it were a lullaby. The lighthouse itself is a squat, whitewashed stone tower, its paint flaking in long, vertical strips where the sea wind has been scraping it for generations. Inside, the stone walls are thick enough that the wind sounds only as a low thrum against the metal doors and the occasional clank of the lantern's mechanism. My days have always been defined by a rhythm that feels almost mechanical, a cadence I have learned to trust more than any human interaction. Each morning I rise before dawn, the lamp in my small bedroom still dim, the bedside clock ticking in a measured 60-second beat that never seems to falter. I pull the thin woolen blanket from the foot of the bed, step onto the cold wooden floor, and open the heavy oak door to the kitchen. The kettle whistles. The scent of tea mingles with the faint brine that drifts through the single cracked window. I sit at the table, a scarred pine surface that has held countless logs, and read the weather report over the radio. The forecast is always the same. Clear skies, moderate swell, low visibility after midnight. I note it, then set about my chores. The first task is always to check the lantern. The lens is a massive glass assembly, a crown of prisms that have been polished to a faint gleam. I climb the iron staircase, the steps groaning under my boots, and pull the lever that engages the rotation. The great Fresnel lens spins in a slow, steady turn, each revolution a reminder that the light is still there, cutting through the black like a steady hand. I check the oil levels, replace the wick, and make sure the lantern's brass gears are free of rust. It takes me about 15 minutes. Sometimes more if the wind has been particularly harsh and the mechanism needs a gentle nudge. After the lantern, I inspect the foghorn. The horn is a massive brass beast that sounds a deep, mournful note every 15 minutes when the fog rolls in. I wind the weight-driven clockwork, adjust the pressure, and listen for the low hum that tells me the organ is ready. The sound travels across the water, a steady pulse that is both a warning to ships and a comfort to me, an affirmation that I am still a part of something larger than this isolated rock. The day proceeds in that same measured fashion, cleaning the glass, polishing the brass, noting the tides in a logbook that hangs on the wall, its pages worn thin at the corners. I write in a steady, almost detached hand, like a clerk recording minutes. June 14th, 2024. Foghorn tested. Normal. Lantern oil topped. No vessels sighted. I repeat the same sentences, day after day, the language becoming a kind of prayer. It was on a Tuesday in late October that the first slip began to appear, though I would not have called it a slip at the time. I opened the logbook to write my entry, and the page beneath the last line was already filled with ink, a date I did not recognize. June 10th, 2023. Heard a voice in the wind, a low hum like a child's laugh. I stared at the ink, the letters crisp and dry, as if someone had taken a pen and written them with intention. My hand trembled slightly when I lifted the pen, unsure whether to erase it or to add my own words. I decided to leave it, a quiet intrusion in an otherwise perfect record. The next night, as the tide rose and the sky darkened, I sat on the lighthouse's narrow balcony, the wind tugging at my coat. The light swept across the water in a slow, sweeping arc, reaching out to a horizon that seemed to swallow it whole. Somewhere far out, a ship's horn bellowed a low note that faded into the night. I felt the familiar weight of the night's silence press against my ears. After a while, I heard the foghorn's note, only it came late, 13 minutes after the scheduled interval. I checked the clockwork. The weight was still in place, the mechanism engaged. I waited, and it sounded again, on the exact schedule. It was as if a breath had been held, and then released. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen and opened the pantry. A small tin of biscuits sat on the shelf, its label still attached, the date on the canister reading March 2022. I had never seen that tin before, nor did I remember ever buying anything that old. I set it aside, intending to discard it later, but then I found a half-eaten piece of hard, stale bread tucked beneath it, as if someone had taken a bite and left it. I brushed it aside, but the feeling lingered, a sense that the house had been occupied in a way I could not account for. Days turned into weeks. I began to notice other small irregularities. The radio would sometimes flicker on with a static hiss, then settle on a station that was not listed on my dial. An old folk song in a language I could not place, sung in a minor key that seemed to trace the contour of the sea. The lighthouse's iron door, which I always locked at night, sometimes felt less resistant when I turned the key, as if someone else had already moved it. I chalked it up to the rust loosening with the salt air. One night, after a storm had passed, I went out to clean the lens. The glass was wet with spray, the sea wind still howling. As I wiped, a droplet fell from the edge of the lens onto my hand. I raised my eyes to the view outside the tower and saw that the sea was unnaturally still. Not a single ripple broke the surface, and the moon reflected on the water as a perfect, unbroken circle. It was as if the ocean had paused, holding its breath. I stood there, my coat flapping, listening to the faint ticking of the lighthouse clock. Behind me, the lantern's light rotated, casting long, thin bands across the stone walls. The ticking grew louder, more insistent, each second a reminder of the passage of time in a place where days are otherwise indistinguishable. I felt the weight of the silence pressing against me, and for a moment I wondered if the lighthouse itself was waiting for a ship that would never come, waiting for a signal that would never be sent. I went back to my logbook that night, the pages still mostly blank. I wrote, October 28th, 2024. Sea unusually calm. Light rotating. No vessels. Foghorn on schedule. My hand moved slowly, the ink flowing in a line that seemed almost too deliberate. When I finished, I closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. The wind outside shifted, and the lighthouse shuddered softly, as if it were breathing. Now, many years later, I no longer keep the logbook. The pages have been collected and archived on the mainland, the lighthouse automated, and left to run without a keeper. I still return sometimes, to stand on the balcony and watch the light sweep across the water, to hear the faint hum of the foghorn, to feel the rhythmic tick of the old clock. The sea remains, as always, indifferent. The small things, the extra tin, the half-eaten bread, the stray song, are still there, tucked into the corners of memory, quiet reminders that even in the most regimented of routines, something can tilt just enough to make the world feel a little too large, a little too still. There is no grand climax, no revelation that explains the oddities. Only the steady, unhurried continuation of a life lived in the interval between light and dark. A lighthouse holding its vigil while the sea, ever patient, does the same. And as the night stretches out, the light keeps turning. The foghorn keeps sounding, and the world keeps turning, unremarkably, inexorably onward. Story 2. The Signal. They hired me to man the lighthouse during the winter storms when the main station in town lost power. My job was simple: monitor the radio, log transmissions, and ensure the beacon stayed lit. The rest was silence, endless, stretching in all directions. The lighthouse stood on a craggy outcrop, its concrete walls damp with salt, its air thick with the hum of old electronics. I arrived with a duffel bag, a thermos of coffee, and the quiet understanding that I'd be alone for weeks. The routine settled quickly. Each night I'd power up the radio, its dial glowing softly in the dim room. Static hissed like sea foam, and I'd scribble down the occasional weather report from a distant buoy. The rest was the creak of the tower, the groan of wind outside, and the rhythmic flash of the beacon. I slept fitfully in the cramped quarters below, waking to the same gray light pressing against the windows. On the third night, it happened. Between the static, a voice, faint, like a whisper carried on the tide. "Check the—" The words dissolved into noise. I strained to hear, but the radio spat only silence. I rewound the tape, played it again. Nothing but static. I told myself it was wind, or the radio's own static, a trick of the mind. But it came again the next night. "Check the eastern." Then a burst of interference. Now I waited, hand hovering over the controls. The tape ran out. No replay would help. The voice was gone. I stared at the map on the wall, tracing the coastline. Eastern what? Beach? Approach? The word felt important, urgent. By the seventh night, the voice was clearer. Check the eastern tower. Then a click, as if cut off. I rolled my shoulders, the room suddenly tight. There was no eastern tower. The lighthouse was the only structure for miles. I called the main station, but the line was dead. Radio silence. I told myself someone had misphrased a report, that the storm had distorted the signal. But the unease stayed, curling in my chest like smoke. The nights blurred. The voice returned, always the same phrase, growing sharper with each repetition. I began scanning frequencies, hunting for the source. Nothing. I checked the logs, but no one had mentioned an eastern tower. Sleep eluded me. The lighthouse seemed colder, the air heavier, as though the stone walls pressed closer. I started seeing shapes in the periphery, dark figures at the window, a flicker of movement down the stairs. Always gone when I turned. On night 14, the voice changed. You're already here. My breath caught. The beacon's light stuttered, its rhythm faltering. I slammed my fist on the control panel. The light steadied. The radio was silent now, but the words echoed in my skull. I wandered the tower, flashlight in hand, checking every switch, every wall. The eastern side was solid concrete, the windows staring out at nothing but sea. The nights after, the voice grew quiet. No static, no whispers. Just the hum of the radio, the creak of the tower. But something had shifted. The silence felt deliberate, watching. I stopped sleeping. I scanned the airwaves, but only my own breath and the distant crash of waves answered. The beacon flashed, steady now, but its light felt dimmer, as if the world itself had dimmed. They sent a replacement on the 20th night. I met them at the dock, hollow-eyed, my report clutched in my hand. I didn't mention the voice. What if they thought me mad? Or worse, what if they heard it too? The new operator, a young woman with bright eyes, took the radio key without question. As the boat carrying her disappeared into the mist, I lingered on the dock, the cold biting my skin. Now, when the wind is just right, I still hear a whisper in the static. Check the eastern tower. But I don't turn. Some things, I've learned, are best left unheard.